Is America's military and the U.S. government asleep at the wheel amidst these historically high tensions and violence in the Middle East? The Pentagon had a series of embarrassing exchanges with the press over the ongoing Lloyd Austin hospitalization scandal. Now, as a reminder, Austin was in the hospital for what we now know were issues related to prostate cancer. Biden and his senior officials weren't told this for days. Here's John Kirby answering a question about that.
So the president has known for, I guess, 5 days now that Secretary Austin was in the hospital, but he wasn't informed why?
He was not informed until last Friday that Secretary Austin was in the hospital. He was not informed until this morning that the root cause of that hospitalization was prostate cancer.
Is that because the White House knew and didn't inform the president, or because Secretary Austin chose not to share that with the president?
Nobody at the White House knew that Secretary Austin had prostate cancer until this morning, and the president was informed immediately after we were.
Okay. Last week, we learned that Jake Sullivan, I believe, found out about the fact that Secretary Austin was hospitalized on Thursday morning. So just want to clarify, are you saying the president found out a day later than the NSC did?
No, Jake was informed, our National Security Advisor was informed that Secretary Austin was in the hospital and had been for some time. He found out late Thursday afternoon, and he and the Chief of Staff, Mr. Zients, informed the president later that evening, early that evening, not long after they learned. They informed the president directly, Thursday evening.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, still on his Middle East diplomacy tour, he seemed to undermine his own administration's position over whether a genocide is occurring in Gaza.
We believe the submission against Israel to the International Court of Justice distracts the world from all of these important efforts. And moreover, the charge of genocide is meritless. It's particularly galling, given that those who are attacking Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, as well as their supporter Iran, continue to openly call for the annihilation of Israel and the mass murder of Jews. All express grave concern about the dire humanitarian situation and the number of civilians killed in Gaza. We know that facing an enemy that embeds itself among civilians, who hides in and fires from schools, from hospitals, makes this incredibly challenging. But the daily toll on civilians in Gaza, particularly on children, is far too high.
Other countries across the world, overwhelmingly outside of the U.S. direct sphere of influence in the global south, are increasingly also applying pressure on the Biden administration to respond to claims that there is a genocide unfolding in Gaza. Most recently, the Indonesian president also spoke to Joe Biden directly, confronted him on this, and Joe Biden changed the subject. Let's take a look at that.
Yield the floor to my friend.
Indonesia appeal to the U.S. to do more to stop the atrocities in Gaza. Ceasefire is a must for the sake of humanity. Once again, thank you for your invitation, President Biden. Thank you.
Thank you. And as we met outside, as you got out of your automobile, we had a very important discussion on climate.
I think the optics of that aren't great.
Yeah, he didn't even, he should just, if he could defend his position, if he holds the position, or change his mind or do something to address what the Indonesian president said. He could say that we also want there to be a ceasefire, but Biden, take the position that there can't be a ceasefire until Hamas is eliminated. But we're doing everything we can to urge the Israeli government to limit civilian deaths. Perhaps he knows that's not a very persuasive line, or at least his base. Democrats aren't persuaded by it. Instead, he said, let's talk about the climate.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that even though Blinken keeps insisting that there's no evidence of genocide, we will have this International Criminal Court of Justice hearing happening later this week, where this exact issue will be litigated. up until this point, a number of experts, including Mokhiber, who very notably stepped down from his position at the UN, where he had spent a 20-year career litigating exactly this question of genocide all across the world, said he had to leave the UN because of their failure to recognize one of the clearest, if not the most clear-cut case of genocide that he had ever seen, pointing out specifically that normally the hardest part of proving genocide is proving a country's intent. It's not necessarily about the number of people that are killed or things like that, but it's about whether the country has a stated intent of conducting a genocide, obliterating a population. And in the case of Israel, there have just been so many high-profile members of the Israeli government, including Benjamin Netanyahu at the very top, who have engaged in rhetoric that is expressly supportive of either genocide or ethnic cleansing, that is a uniquely easy part of this case to prove here for South Africa, of course, who brought this petition. So it is interesting from a political perspective to see the Biden administration's choice here to respond to a direct appeal from another head of state by saying, by the way, climate is cool. By the way, we had a nice chit-chat about the climate. Blinken continuing to insist that there's absolutely no humanitarian concerns here and saying, well, Hamas is the real problem. That can be fine. There's no precluding.
Well, I don't know. He's not saying there's no humanitarian concerns. He's expressing that they do have humanitarian concerns.
But what is the source of the humanitarian concerns? To acknowledge a humanitarian concern, but then say, well, we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep creating a humanitarian crisis as long as Hamas exists is kind of an admission that you are helping to perpetuate. You are contributing to the genocide or the humanitarian abuses that are ongoing, and willing to do so with impunity because you think that response, that excuse, holds up. And I think what we're seeing from polls and the dissatisfaction of Biden's base, as they say increasingly that they're not willing to vote for him, is that while that excuse might hold up in a press briefing room or in the United Nations where America has veto power, it's not holding up with the electorate.
Yeah, it's clearly making him much less popular with his base, with young people, hurting him perhaps with some minority groups. So he's going to have to either change course or come up with a more compelling answer, or certainly not just dodge to climate when he's asked about it. It seems like a real problem for the president.
What do you make of the Lloyd Austin rigmarole? It does seem like a sort of unforced error, and is the implication that Biden really is asleep at the wheel if he doesn't know that cabinet members that are pretty important to wrestling with the escalating violence in the Middle East are incommunicado and not at their posts?
But it wasn't just Biden, it was the entire administration. No one knew that this was happening, people directly under Lloyd Austin. So this isn't actually a situation where you can chalk this up to, is Biden too old or too out of it or something? No one knew. This seems like mostly on Lloyd Austin. This was a choice he made to keep this very quiet. It's not clear why. I mean, people can be even our public officials entitled to some level of privacy about their medical situation, but his underling who took over thought he was on vacation, didn't even know there was a medical issue. And this is, we're in very volatile times, as everyone is recognizing. So it seems very weird. I think you're right that unforced error is the exact terminology I would use as well. And I think the decision not to punish him at all for this is, frankly, a little suspect.
Well, what kind of punishment is there?
I mean, dismissal, replacement.
I don't know that I would expect that to be the outcome. I think that for other reasons he shouldn't be in this post, namely that he's gone through the Raytheon revolving door, and we have a Secretary of Defense who has charitably, what would charitably be described as divided interests and priorities here. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is what it feels like is probably some discomfort about being public with a particular kind of cancer that is stigmatized and stigmatizing. And so I appreciate as a human being, on a human level, why he wouldn't want that to be national news. But at the same time, that's the job. And it seems like one more piece of evidence and a mounting pile of evidence that there's something really amiss in the Biden administration, and that they do not have their ducks in a row. We'll see if that has any longer-term political implications as we head into this election year with primaries weeks away.
Weeks away.
So stick around, more coverage of that, more Rising after this.